So we have a lot of stuff to get through. I apologize for my voice. This is a risk of presenting on 2:30 in the afternoon on the last day. So we'll get started and we'll go through this. Hi, I'm Shawn DeArmond, web architect for UC Davis.
And I'm John Kealy, the web services manager at UCSF.
And so also Quinn Valiant, we put her on the slide. She's not here. We knew she wasn't going to be, but she's also been a very large part. She's from UCLA, and she's been a very large part of this this collaboration as well. So we need to give her proper props. This is what we're going to talk about today. Like I said, we have a lot of stuff to go through. So I put some time at the end for questions. I want to try to avoid getting too deep and around on questions during the presentation. If I really screw something up and you need to tell me and we need to figure that out, that's fine, but let's try to keep questions to the end if we can.
Like if the screen goes dark.
What's that?
Like if the screen goes
dark.
Like
if the screen goes dark or something, yeah. All right. Oh, right. So, also, I have SiteFarm shirts, and there's going to be quizzes. And if you're already wearing one, you're not allowed to win.
What?
So first quiz question is, how many UC campuses are there?
10.
You win. I'll come up later and get it. Yep.
All right, I can deliver.
Come up later.
Okay, sorry.
All right, yeah, so there's University of California is really big, and so we want to kind of give you some idea of what we're talking about here. So there are 10 campuses, that is correct, of the University of California, but we also have 3 national laboratories, including one in Los Alamos, New Mexico. There's also a law school. Is that in San Francisco?
Hastings, yes.
Hastings is in San Francisco. So we have like a lot. And also, in addition, kind of mixed in here, we have 5 medical centers. So 5 of these campuses there have medical centers, including San Francisco, which that is what they are. They don't do undergrads and multidisciplinary stuff like all the rest of us. And so just like I looked these up on Wikipedia so we can figure out what these are, but just give you some idea. So we have our total enrollment in 2017. April 2017 was 264,400 something students across the entire system. We employ 65,000 faculty and academics, that's like researchers, but also teaching faculty and lecturers and stuff like that. 144,000 staff members, of which is me and John and our teams and stuff. But also through these medical centers, there are 4.5 million outpatient visits a year. So we serve a huge amount of mostly California people, right? As well as that number is really small. 365,000 ER visits a year and 165,000 inpatients. The total annual budget of the University of California, the total annual revenue, because it's not always the same, though it's supposed to be. Total annual revenue of the University of California is about $30 billion. So we're a very large organization. And yet, believe it or not, we don't talk to each other much, or really at all, which is sort of a strange thing. Until Bad Camp a few years ago. We're going to talk about that. Why don't you talk about kind of the problems that we have here?
So one of the interesting things we have is how do you start collaborating in a big system? And the new CIO for UC says, crying on a towel together is the first thing you do. Where you go, oh, I have these problems. You go, oh, I have the same problems. Like, oh, the same problems?
Yeah.
Maybe we can solve them together. So some of the problems that we have are, of course, lack of resources, right? There's $30 billion, but it doesn't all go to the web budget. We're lucky, but what happens at a lot of UCs is the money is spread through all the departments, through all the organizations, and maybe the School of Pharmacy wants to spend some money at UCSF on something, or the veterinary school at Davis wants to spend money on something, and they end up spending money on a lot of the same things over and over again. Like, hey, we're building a website. It's going to have people, it's going to have news, it's going to have articles, and we want it to integrate to the calendar and all these other things. It's like, great. Well, that's going to be $100 and something thousand. Like, okay, maybe we'll build a smaller website. So what we wanted to do is, when we start to build these things, to have a way to share them together. And we started talking about this back in Drupal 7 days. Like, I think I first met Shawn in 2011. Yeah. That's when we started the crying on the towel together stuff. Or do we have that other slide?
That's another slide. So okay. Yeah, really the problem that because we're very distributed and people just end up spending money whenever on their own thing without talking, we end up with wildly varying versions of Drupal. Like a lot of different kinds of Drupal shows up all over the place, right? We have 10 campuses, so there's 10 versions of Drupal, right? No. There's probably like 50 versions of Drupal or 100 versions of Drupal.
At least 200 or more on my instance.
We had two at the Lawrence Hall of Science.
There you go.
I managed two that are completely different.
There you go. Yeah. We managed 3, and there was at least 3 or 4 more on campus. There's all these different versions, and they all take all these different management styles, right? Of course, it's just Drupal, right? No, it's not just Drupal either.
Right. Okay.
There's all this other stuff and more and more and more. And so not only does this mean a lot of different platforms, a lot of different servers, it means wildly varying skill sets, wildly varying technologies, of course, and that is what really makes it very difficult to collaborate, right? So,
and we had to make those choices by themselves too, right? Like pharmacy decides, we're going to use WordPress, and veterinary school says, we're going to use Cold Fusion. I don't know why they would do that, but so yeah.
So you get to talk about.
Oh, yay! Very exciting. So this is one of our 2 campuses, or main campuses. We have places all over the city, but this is our new Mission Bay campus. So what we did, we're lucky in that, as Shawn said, we're just a medical school. We're a very big medical school associated with UC Berkeley way back. But because of that, we have a more central focus than a lot of the other campuses. We don't have, the humanities there and everybody else, so it makes things a little easier. And we have more central funding coming through the hospital because we do sharing of funds from the hospital with the School of Medicine, etc. So, as you can see, this is what I figure a small website costs. To spin up a small Drupal site, you're lucky to get out of there for $13,000. This is without using a distribution or any of this stuff we're going to talk to, right? This is you just hire somebody, they're pretty good, they can put a UCSF design together for you, they build a WYSIWYG editor, you're done, right? Still you're out $13,000. This is one of those cases where little numbers add up to really big numbers when you start multiplying them. So we back in 2011, moved to hosting on the cloud, and we used Acquia Cloud for that. And as you can see, you can see quite a few things here, right? So this is when we were still handling people building their custom websites. That number's 11. I think that number is like 26 or 50 or something like that. And then you can see the number shot up to 500 over 1 year. Now, that's when we get distribution. Because what happens is people who want to get a website, we don't charge them to build that small website, and there's a lot of demand for doing that. So those are people. Now, not everyone would have built a small website. Maybe they wouldn't have done anything, but maybe they would have built a small website. We don't know. Anyway, so what we did was we drove the cost per site down. Now you can see what happened, right? This is based on our Acquia hosting. So these numbers, don't go and negotiate with Acquia now, but these were our numbers a few years ago. So basically we're running around $4,000 a site when we were at that smaller level. But then once we moved into the hundreds, we're building a couple hundred websites a year, the cost per site dropped tremendously.
But even that 4,000 is less than 13,000 by a good chunk right off the bat.
Sure. Just so you know, CIOs love these kinds of numbers.
Yeah.
So if you can bring this kind of slide and say, at UCSF, they leverage their scale for value. That's like the magic little term.
That's the word.
That's the term. But you can see it. It's right there. It's real. And they move forward from there. So this is where we get into really big numbers. So this is for 1 year, our estimated cost avoidance.
Per year, not cumulative.
Not cumulative. That's 1 year, right? Because we host nearly 1,000 websites now. So the cost per site for hosting goes down. Now, there's other things in here that you're probably aware of, which is we're keeping this stuff up to date, right? So the liability for having a server under somebody's desk that might get compromised, cost the university millions of dollars, goes away, which is also being a medical school. That's why we're like super freaked out about this stuff, right? So we built 406. This was a big year. I'm not going to lie. This was a really big year. That's why we got so much savings on that. 469 is the biggest year before that was 320. So this was very big because we just rolled out a new version of our installation package that's really nice. Thank you, everybody involved with that project. Okay, so I'm going to continue with the
So what he didn't tell you is that was all Drupal 7, right? All that stuff that he did was all Drupal 7, and this is a whole lot of years of towel crying.
Yes. So Shawn and I and Brian, who's not here today, from Berkeley, would often cry on towels together at these conferences. But then in 2015, we had a new friend, our friend Quinn, because it was in LA, and she was new to Drupal, and she knew us, and she said, "Hey, how do you do this Drupal thing? What's better, the Davis version or the San Francisco version? It's like, you two guys fight and figure out what's better, right?"
And I said at the time,
mine's better. Yay! But what we also realized, because at that conference, it was all about, hey, Drupal 8's coming. Are you prepared? How are you going to use it? And I said, hey, yeah, mine might be better for you right now, but let's think about making this bigger, not just San Francisco and LA or San Francisco and Davis and LA. How do we get everybody to do things together? And it's a lot easier when people don't have practice in place, when everything's new, to bring in new ideas and have people change the way they work. It's a lot harder to say to somebody, hey, yeah, you have this working system, why don't you trash it and use mine? It's never going to go anywhere.
And Drupal 8 was just a great opportunity. We knew there was so many fundamental things different. We pretty much knew we had to start from scratch.
Right.
So let's not all start from scratch. Let's just...
Whoever goes first.
Right? So we went first.
I was kind of shocked, actually.
Yeah. So, this sort of, we decided, San Francisco had all these sites, and LA didn't have anything, and we had kind of our own little starter kit, but we just recently got a bunch of funding to really push this forward, and so we got my awesome team together, and we did.
Yeah.
So I want to cover this because this is really important. Like, the effort that we did in service management is the development was awesome too, guys. Good job. But the service management to actually deliver this service to the campus and bring people along for the ride in a university is very complex. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of managing expectations. So what we ended up doing is, when I was talking to John here, I said, okay, we need to, I want to make the case for how much it's going to cost. And so he said, well, I have these numbers, and you just saw them. And I said, okay, let me just use those numbers, and I'll cut them down a little bit because they spend a lot more money than we do. So I'll cut them down a little bit, and I'll kind of estimate how many sites we're going to build over time. And we knew we had maybe somewhere between 1,500, 2,000 websites on campus. So our eventual goal is maybe we'll get all of those. But let's start small and we'll build. And so I put together all the cost avoidance, and I brought it to our director, and she goes, I can't use these numbers. They're way too high. No one would believe us. I'm like, but yeah, in fact, they're actually less. But that's what we did. We put together a cost analysis, cost avoidance analysis. We conducted surveys across the campus to existing customers. We use this service product called Hannon Hill Cascade Server. Anybody not from UC Davis know what that is? If you don't, you can Google it and claw your eyes out. And then, but we had to manage those expectations too. We had to bring these people along. They were in our service already, so we had to bring them along, and we had to make sure that they weren't freaking out, and that this was going to be better. This was definitely a carrot versus stick thing. This was all carrot. We knew we could build this Drupal thing, and it's going to be awesome, and everybody's going to want to, but at that point it was vaporware. And we also conducted we did some development. We conducted some usability tests. We had a whole day of usability tests, and we would sit behind people and watch them poke through our system. And the politics, the presentations, managing expectations, going to meetings. I went to all these meetings, and every possible constituent on campus I talked to if I could. And we entered into a 6-month beta program starting in last October. So about a year ago, we did 6 months of beta. We had 3 workshops where we brought people in for half a day and gave them an hour and a half, sort of like, here it is. And then for the next 2 hours or so, they brought their content. We gave them a website, and they put stuff in it. Well, while the whole development team was there, and we could answer any questions that you guys needed. We're there for you this morning, right? We had about 80 people over the course of 6 months, and we launched, I don't remember what, 15 or 20 sites or so in that beta program. We actually launched those sites. And then in April, we said, okay, beta program's done, launched the campus. We now have about 60 live sites and about 200 in development. So that was that. Going through this process is long and complex, but I think extremely valuable. And so what I'm offering here is leverage what we have kind of already done. Now I know different campuses are different, and there's some different use cases, and we can talk about all that stuff too, but this sort of effort is something that you cannot discount.
There's one thing on the politics thing I want to mention, which was huge for us, and I think was big for you too, which is partnering with your university relations or public affairs or whoever that is, making sure they approve the designs and that they're on board. Because one of the things people don't want to do is then go to university relations and go, is my site on brand? You're like, no. They've already approved it, and you can also roll up accessibility and all these other headaches in that point, and save those from people later.
Yep. So. All right, so I'm going to mention next some of the features and some of the functionality that we built. So the biggest feature of this whole thing, you already saw. It's that. That's the biggest feature of this whole thing. But I'm going to show you this too, and I'm not going to go through all this. We have stuff like we can build Drupal, like we can build Drupal, but to figure out what we should build was what all that prep really was, in our continual communication with our customers and talking to people. Say, well, I really can't join in unless you have this particular piece of functionality, right? So we did all that. We built some extra stuff that's just UC Davis specific. So these are things that we decided, the rest of the campuses don't need this, but we do. So we're gonna build this stuff too.
You share that back though?
What's that?
You're sharing that back?
Yes.
Some of them yes, because some of them some of them yes, some of them it doesn't make any sense to. For example, Aggie Feed is our activity stream. I mean, would you, if you want to put an activity on yours, I guess, but
just in case.
Yeah.
Single sign.
Right.
Like
So
exactly
we'll talk about that in a second. Yes, we want to have a mechanism for putting this back into the central system. And then this. Can we have an applause on this? I mean, maybe a start, a little caveat. So we have Beha coverage on the stuff that we build. Obviously we're not going to do full Beha coverage on every single feature of the web form module for a reason, right? And then for all the object-oriented stuff that we build unit tests for that as well. And we've been pushing more and more of our stuff by building services rather than just functions so that we can unit test them. And then we built pretty extensive developer documentation because we knew that if we're going to share this around, then developers from all over are going to need to know what to do with this.
In fact, one of the sprints was developer documentation.
Yeah, that was a 2-week sprint that the time did. So what we don't do is we didn't do end-user documentation as part of the core. The idea was that each campus is sort of in charge of their own end-user documentation. That being said, if you go to sitefarm.ucdavis.edu/training, there's a awful amount of documentation there, just tons of it, which Jessica here put together because she's freaking awesome. And steal from that liberally, because your screenshots will be different because you'll be using your own theme, and maybe you'll add your own functionality, maybe a few extra fields or something like that. But do a lot of copying and pasting there for building your own end user documentation. But the developer documentation is pretty solid. And I just want to, just because we can show it off.
Hey,
there is. He did that one. So here's some sites that we have running. Yay!
Uh-oh.
This one was built by our fire chief, who came to our beta workshops and sat through there and put the content into the website and asked questions, and is a pretty cool guy.
That's awesome.
And the Center for Health and Environment. There's another one. This is an example of just the news page, but we did this really great stuff with categories and the colors. See how the colors are you can't really see it in the picture, but they're sort of the highlights that are there. All right. So next, I'm going to get into sort of some of the architecture of distribution. So here's my next quiz question: is what is the difference between a profile and a distribution?
Can we Google it?
Drupal has this thing called install profiles, and they have this concept called distributions. What's the difference? Go for it.
Isn't the profile how you install the distribution?
That's pretty close. If no one else gives me a better one, I think that's pretty good.
Like the 10 filter. All right.
You win. But let me give a little bit. So, Drupal has this thing called an install profile, and it lives in your doc root or web /profiles/stuff. And the Drupal core comes with two of them. One's called standard, and one's called minimal, right? So you can build more though, and that's what we did. We have a profile, and that's its own Git repo. And when you install Drupal, that's sort of what that's what gets installed on top of Drupal core. It could be extra modules, custom modules, features, perhaps custom default configuration. All that stuff would be built into the profile. The distribution is the bundle of everything, all of Drupal core, all of your modules, all of everything that comes together that becomes the thing that you end up kind of publishing, right? And so this diagram, and we're gonna, it's gonna be more arrows in just a second.
Why isn't that centered?
We're using Composer now, right? So we're all using Composer. So the distribution is a Git repository that has a Composer JSON file. That is the one where you run Composer install. The Composer JSON file has a dependency, or the distribution has a dependency of a project, which is the profile. And so it says, if you were to do it with the command, you say Composer require UC Davis, SiteFarm Seed, and then that distribution would depend on the profile, and then Composer would go and grab that and install it and make it part of it. You can add as many other so that's the difference. Does that make sense? Okay, it's sort of important to understand those. To understand the relationship between them. So the other thing, though, is we have a theme. And the theme is also another Git repository. And so the profile also has a Composer JSON file. You don't run Composer install on the profile itself. You run it on the distribution. But the profile has a dependency on the theme. Because, so that's there, right? The Composer JSON file of the profile also has dependencies on Drupal modules, a lot of them, right? 20 of them or something like that. So when you run Composer install, well, let's keep going. The distribution could also, if you wish to run it this way, have dependencies on Drupal modules, or themes, or more profiles. And then, just because we do this too, we also have Pattern Lab. Pattern Lab is not a dependency as far as Composer goes, but we have that built into the theme, right? So that's just part of it. So all of this to say that when you run Composer install on the distribution, it goes and grabs all these things and it sticks it all together. There's one more piece. We have a UC Davis sub-profile. Huh? What's that? So, I'll talk about that in a second, about how it happens, but there is a concept of a sub-profile and a base profile. If you've ever worked with sub-themes and base themes, it's sort of a similar concept. So, the UC Davis sub-profile, or perhaps a UCSF sub-profile, would be another repo that would be a Composer require from the distribution.
And you could potentially do sub profiles, like maybe your school of medicine.
Well, let's not go crazy. But he's right. You can't. Yeah, so if you had a campus profile and then a school profile and then a sites under there, so yeah, you can do that too.
Don't tell them.
So why would you, so you have a distribution, but you might actually have multiple distributions. But the distribution doesn't really contain a lot of stuff itself. It's really only a couple dependencies. So we might create a distribution for deployment on Acquia and another distribution for deployment on Pantheon. And so it's really just the composer JSON file would have the extra modules that Acquia requires, like Acquia Connector and the ACSF module, and maybe there'll be extra modules that Pantheon really works well on Pantheon's platform, like Search API or the Pantheon Solar something or other. Anyway, yeah. So there might be extra modules that you wouldn't want to have those there in your profile. You want to have them here, so that they're specific to the deployment that you're going to make. All right. So let's talk about subprofiles. The subprofiles, it's not actually in Drupal core yet. It's a patch. No, we're not hacking core. Don't worry, Kitty. You're okay. This is a patch. We're being very controlled about this. It's a patch that has almost 400 comments on it. And I was just talking to Angie about it today, and we're gonna push this thing through. But we are including that patch in the Composer JSON file of the profile. So patches can also be included in Composer JSON, and Composer will automatically apply those patches to any Drupal core, modules, or I think anything else as well. That's the issue number, if you care to spend 3 days reading. Also Acquia is using this in their Lightning distribution as well, and I've been talking with those folks about it. So this is a thing. It's fine.
For a patch, it's pretty stable.
For a patch, it's pretty stable. We just got to get it over the hump. But this is available. If you've ever tried to open source something in a university system,
Who's tried? Anybody?
Has anybody tried to do that lately?
Oh,
Okay, a couple.
brave,
Yeah.
very brave.
So it's not easy. It took me about 6 months, but we did it. So we have the base profile of SiteFarm Seed, and then we call this the SiteFarm distro template. This is the template that you would use to go create your own distro. So you might fork this and add your own stuff to your own Composer JSON file. You might create a couple versions of this, like I said, one for Acquia, one for Pantheon. We probably won't update this all that often because, like I said, there's not much to update. So
Figure it out.
Yeah, maybe we will, but you could pull in the updates. But really, once you forward that, it's sort of your own thing. It's just a start state, get you going.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know if any of you stopped by the FFW booth, but we have Doxel integration in here as well, and we have documentation on how to get that running. So if you type, get Doxel, type fin in it, and your site is running, which is pretty awesome. And also, like, we're all university, or we are, but this isn't really higher ed specific. Like, there's not really much or anything in here that says, well, if I'm not higher ed, that's just not going to be useful to me. So even those that didn't raise your hand just a few minutes ago, check it out. I mean, it's pretty good.
There's no shopping cart integration.
Pretty soon we're gonna. True.
I want to buy an education.
So you totally derailed my thought.
Might be good for admissions.
All right. You're going to put in. So part of this whole collaboration thing is now that we have other campuses starting to use it, they can start contributing stuff. So we're thinking of putting together more faculty-specific things into it. So it might start moving to a little more higher ed.
Talk
but
about that for a second.
You'll talk about that. Well, that's a
not
little
now.
later.
Okay.
That's a little later. Anyway, so that's that. So talk about why this is good for you.
Oh, so why do we want to do it? Well, test coverage is cool. We don't often get a chance to write a lot of test coverage. And it's great to see something that's already mapped out that way. And it kind of encourages us to stay clean and good, since it's clean and good. Common data structures. So this is getting into, I think, the state of, we want to be able to do things and hand them back to the rest of the university. And I'm going to talk about one particular case. So the first thing we sat down on with Davis to talk about how we're going to use this going forward is the Department of Medicine. We're probably going to use the distribution to build about 20 sites and build a particular distribution for our Department of Medicine inside our School of Medicine. It's the largest department in the school, as you may suspect. Anyway, what they have there is we're pulling people data from a system we call Profiles, which pulls all the PubMed information in, their grants, all these other great things about them, makes available via an API that hopefully will be more stable once they roll it out to every other campus. And we're also pulling in our LDAP. We're pulling in a lot of data, and we've been doing this for years, squishing it together, and making it so you just put an email address as a site owner. If that is a valid email address, it pulls in all the data about that person. Anthony and other folks have been working on this. Eric, it's really great. People love it. It's one of the things that when people say, why don't I do this site in Wix? I go, does Wix do this? And they go, no, doesn't. So it's pretty cool. So what that allows us to do, though, hey, we're number one school on the West Coast. Federated sites. So there's divisions within. So we're doing things also around using Acquia Lift and Content Hub to be able to federate information inside this department, because they have divisions in the department. That's why it's so bloody big. And the division person may put a story in that the main person at the department might want, or even the person at the school level might want. And then you can federate those stories around and finally really break down the silos between the site and help people get access to all the content we're creating. Because similar to the way we're doing a lot of redundant stuff on the development side, there's a lot of redundant stuff happening on the content side. And so we want to get away from that. Well, if we're successful with that, then that might be something that Davis might want to use, and they might not want to have to invent that from scratch, or any other person.
You were kind of going through that slide too.
Yeah, okay. So the things that we like about it as sort of developers, besides what we can give back, is now we have another team of people doing stuff in the same structure, and we can ask Mark or some of these other guys, hey, how do you do such and such, or use your documentation? So we create this common practice. So I think, getting back to Tom's comment, you start with crying on the towel together, you start doing work together, and that work is mostly around creating a common way of doing things, just agreeing like, hey, I do things this way, having a discussion and going, oh yeah, that makes sense, let's do it that way together. And then when you hit your head against the wall, which you will do, there's somebody else who's hit their head against that wall before, and you can have a conversation about, how do I get past this? How do I do something? Instead of just being on your own, because that's the other thing in higher ed, we're all in these little groups all over the place. So having a way to work together, to communicate, having community really helps us to get stuff done. Also, I just love the stuff Davis is doing. They do a lot of great stuff around the best practices, around CI, around Beha, and so we can just copy them. It's great. We don't have to build our own practice, right? And the example of build sites also helps too when we're trying to sell this to other people on campus. Like, why would we use this? What is this about? Who does what? It's just helpful. So I sort of flipped my 2 slides. Sorry about that.
No worries. I also want to say, that like someone asked before, contributing back to the stuff we did for UC Davis, like absolutely, and
right.
Maybe it would go into kind of the SiteFarm Seed, but if not, at the very least, I know there's 3 other campuses that use Hannon Hill Cascade Server plus UCOP, right? And so we built that migration from Hannon Hill Cascade into our Drupal architecture, and it's using the Drupal 8 migrate thing. And give me a second. Mm-hmm. And then so their Hannon Hill might be configured a little differently, but if we're on the same content architecture, right, the mapping should be pretty good, and we of course have Beha Tests for that as well, so we know that it continues to work.
So what I refer this to is like setting up the trap for collaboration by having the common data structures. Right. You have this, something is going to walk in there, and so this weird thing happened where, going back to the people data, so who's at a medical campus of the UC folks here? Okay, cool. At least a couple.
Yeah.
So what's happening is there's this profile system I talked about. As I was really hassling these guys because I couldn't test the database, and they said, "Oh, we're doing this stuff, and we can't. The data's not right." Blah blah blah. I'm like, "Come on, guys." Well, it turns out the reason they were doing all that stuff is they're rolling out profiles to all the other medical centers within UC. So basically, when we build this integration, it's the model that any other UC could do to do the same integration with their School of Medicine.
In fact, it's not just copies of it. It's like
Oh yeah, it's the same.
It's actually the same database. They're pumping the data
Yeah.
into his database.
Yeah, so it's the same database. In fact, I was asking this guy if we could talk about it at DrupalCon. At Bad Camp, and he says, "Well, who are you talking to?" I'm like, "Oh, well, we'll be there with Davis." He's like, "Oh, I'm talking to Davis people right now about putting their branding on their version of the profile site." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, I guess they know." So
yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, so that was neat. I mean, we built sort of this, we built this collaboration because we thought it was the right thing to do for all these other reasons, and then something like this shows up, it's like, well, that's perfect. So we could, like you said, we sort of set the trap, and like this just fell into our lap, and That'll be awesome. So that's all we have. We have about 10 minutes for questions.
Okay.
Go for it, Carol.
How do you bundle the Beha test? I mean, how do you, where do you put the Beha test?
Beha tests are in the thing you're testing. So in this case, it's the profile. Usually, it's the profile. So we have all of our Beha tests in the SiteFarm Seed base profile, and you can see them on GitHub. It's in the tests folder. Hundreds of tests.
You don't break them out based on the feature.
Well, we do. There's lots of features. I mean, there's lot. Okay, so we don't store. Okay, the word feature is sort of a loaded term in Drupal, as in you can load it in 6 different. Anyway, so we have features in Drupal. That's with the capital F. That Mike Potter built the features module, and they're in our profile, right? Beha also has this idea of a feature. So a Beha feature just is a way to bundle a bunch of tests together into a single thing. We do not include the feature, we do not include the Beha feature in the Drupal feature. We include all of our Beha tests in the profile itself, because the profile is the thing we are testing, not the feature necessarily.
The functionality of that, yeah.
The deploys, where do they live?
Still in the profile. They're sitting there.
Profile directory?
Yeah. They're just sitting there. They don't.
Use Beha tests are in the profile.
Yeah.
Yeah, just take a look. Just see. Other questions?
You didn't mention our ongoing Drupal co-working.
What's that?
Drupal co-working.
Right. That's
You didn't
true.
mention that.
That's a good point. So Carson runs part of the service management that we do is Carson runs a twice monthly Drupal co-working event at UC Davis, and so it's 2 hours during the day, and we get people from all over campus to just come and work on their stuff. And sometimes we have a presentation, and sometimes people ask questions, and if we say, wow, that's a good question, let me show everybody how that works, then we might do that on the board. But it's just a way to bring people together and sort of inject this Drupal community thing into the organization.
We do a users helping users, just
There you
like
go.
that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we want to start doing more, maybe a little more formal training around that. We're sort of talking about ways of doing that too, but just to get the community going works out really well.
Other questions?
But I saw on one of the slides, I think it said Vue.js blocks.
Uh-huh.
Seemed interesting.
Oh, okay. The question for the recording was, there was a site that said something about Vue.js blocks. What is that? So there is a Drupal module called the Progressively Decoupled Blocks module, and it's project/PDB. And so what that allows you to do is it allows you to take a front-end JavaScript library and create a block that implements that JavaScript library plus whatever code you're going to use to do the thing. And so at the time there wasn't a Vue.js module for that, or a plugin for that. So Mark wrote the Vue.js plugin for that, and so we're going to basically just add that module in. So because we use Site Factory, we don't allow custom code on the site. We lock down our main code base, and we don't allow any more modules than we have. But people make requests, and we say okay or no or why. But through this being able to use PDB and then the Vue.js, in Site Factory, each site is allowed to have a separate theme, and it has this fun interface for adding the theme as a repo. And so PDB blocks can be created in the theme layer. So it's in this way that we're allowing custom coding on our site. So there might be a situation where they're going to want to access a remote data API from some whatever system that they have, Oracle system or Cold Fusion or something like that. So if they can't get that system out of that, just expose it as a REST API, create a Vue.js block to make those requests, and now you can have that integration to be your application to control your data on your SiteFarm site, and it's right in there. So we're rolling that out next month on ours, and the reason it's not in core is because, well, maybe not everybody really needs that, but there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't just add those modules in.
They're standard Drupal.
They're just standard Drupal modules. So we took a big effort to remove any modules from the UC Davis version when we made the SiteFarm Seed that weren't like truly a dependency, like really necessary, because you can always add them back in the sub-profile.
Yeah.
So that was one. Well, and also I think we only recently put that in, and when we built the seed, we hadn't put that in yet. So anyway, yeah.
Besides the University of California campuses, how many universities have other installations?
I'm sorry.
Besides University of California, who else has done installations? Really no one.
No, we just got this open sourced a week and a half ago. So until a week and a half ago, I was literally not allowed to share this with any other university. Okay? So, except for UC. So we've been talking about this over Slack for months and months and months now, and we've been sharing years. We've been sharing the code base around during development across the UC system, because we're one system. We can share code without it being licensed. But in order to share it outside of the University of California, we had to put a license on it. We got GPL2 on it. Now everybody can use it. But that was really only a week ago. So. Yeah.
That was all Shawn. That was all Shawn.
Say that again? Yeah, I had a slide on that. There it is. So github.com, UC Davis, and then SiteFarm Seed is the profile, and then the distro template. Yep, it's on the recording too. This will be there. Andrew.
Yeah, so I was curious, like I mean, you've only had this, I guess, up there for 10 days, you're saying, right? And so maybe not so much time to think about it, but what's the contribution process going to look like for both core?
We've been thinking about
that real hard,
Okay.
and so we do have a kind of a more than draft. We have a governance document about sharing among the UCs, and so because it's on GitHub, and because I can't stop it, and I don't know that I would want to, make a pull request. Make a pull request. You post issues because you just can.
Yeah.
We may not do anything, because the way we're working right now is we put this out. Campuses are starting to do it, and then they're gonna build their own stuff. We're gonna build our own stuff. We're gonna get back together in about 6 months and say, okay, what should we bring into core, and what can we share amongst ourselves? And so, because the San Francisco, LA, and Davis have real skin in the game in the form of either cash money or literal skin, then we sort of we call ourselves founding members, and we sort of have the decision making power. We're the maintainers, right? The three of us, and so that's where it's at right now. The governance model does describe a process of sorts where if you want to be part of this and you want to have some say, then you need skin in the game. And exactly what that skin is, we haven't come to that yet.
But we'll talk.
Donations are accepted.
Large bills.
And other. So we really want UCs, right? We definitely want UCs. We want other universities and other people to start using it too. But we really want to get this. Our goal is to really get all the UCs, and it could be that it could receive a central funding from UCOP, but I'm not holding my breath, nor do I necessarily.
Well, one of the things we might, again, talking about collaboration, one of the things we might do is integrate. There's a UC-wide contract to get an accessibility tool that's supposed to go live. That's something everybody would want to use, so we would integrate that into the core.
Yeah, that would make sense, and we're focusing this on UC. We really are, and
which helps.
Which helps.
Yeah.
It's out there, and we're allowed to use it, but we're not going to try to extend use cases necessarily for people outside of UC, unless it just makes sense, because websites are websites, right? And if that makes sense, then that's fine. But for example, e-commerce will probably never be in SiteFarm Seed, actually, right?
I got an idea on that one.
Let's stop. That might be a good example of a sub-profile, which would then be sub-profile. So we would say the SiteFarm PCI or something like that, right? Anyway, there's always ways of doing this.
Create a standard PCI interface at UCSF.
I'll bet you that'd be fun, huh? All right. Yeah.
In terms of UC, is there a site somewhere that says who's using this and where and what the status is?
The only thing we have right now is
within our own campus.
Yeah. So the only thing we have right now is this.
What was the question?
No, the question was: is there a site that talks about who is using this and what the process is and what the governance is?
The place to talk about this and figure out what's going on, though, is get on the UC Tech Slack.
Yeah. If you're in UC, we have a UC-wide Slack.
It's called
See, I didn't even know about that.
uctech.slack.com.
Right.
But yeah, if you have a
And if you're
you
not
have
in
a
UC,
email,
sorry,
you can join.
you can still communicate through through this. We would like to get a website up just to kind of talk about it. UC Tech, uctech.slack.com, and then there's a channel called pound Drupal-8-distro, and if you join that one, that's where the conversation can be around. Just ask questions about how to use it, or
And we have our
whatever.
monthly meetings. We announce them there,
Right.
and so there is some ongoing communications going on.
Right.
Question in the back.
Back.
I think you just answered my question. So that the distro is 8.
Yeah.
It's all 8. Yep.
Yeah.
John.
Okay, so I've used distros before on
Uh-huh.
Drupal 6 and 7 and things like Open Atrium or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And every time I have to upgrade, it's a huge pain in the butt because Drupal updates and then the Open Atrium
Uh-huh.
people have to update and maybe they lag behind and all
Yep.
that stuff. And now I hear that Drupal 8 is putting out releases on a really quick schedule.
Mhm.
Am I going to have that same problem with this?
No. So the deal with SiteFarm Seed, if you look at the Composer JSON file, it's not specific as far as module version numbers, and each distro. Where's my cool? What are you doing?
It's because you have those little scrolling.
Oh, to the level.
Jump by the scroll.
Okay, the distro is what controls the versions of the modules. So we built that SiteFarm Seed profile in the distro, and we haven't touched it in probably 2 months, but it doesn't matter. You're in charge of running Composer Update on your own modules on your own distro, and that goes into your Composer lock file. And so you control the versions of the modules that is on there. And if you don't like the version of the module that the profile requires, you can change that and make a different version of the module.
And this is where the Beha Tests
There you go.
coverage really helps too, in that those tests will run. You'll know what happened if functionally it works. Of
Right.
course, visual regressions, we're still trying to figure that out, but you know.
Right, we haven't done visual regression. So what I would recommend, let's keep going here.
A quick note in this vein is that there's almost zero procedural code. Everything, even in hooks, is an abstracted service. So if you have to update a module that is being affected some way via a hook, you can replace the service in the SiteFarm Seed with your own service. So everything can be swapped out.
So the profile has this is SiteFarm Seed, and that's got a bunch of Beha tests that is expected to run on a fresh install of SiteFarm Seed. If you start changing things here, you don't necessarily want to run all of those Beha tests, but what I would recommend that you do is copy those and put them into your own and modify them for the things that you need, or just the ones that you know you've changed, because we know these all work on the Seed. So you can add your own Beha tests in here, you can copy ones. If you made some changes, you're like, I need to make sure that that one still runs, then maybe copy the article.feature out of here and put it in there, so you just make sure that that one runs all the time. And then you say, oh, well, it failed. Well, why did it fail? Well, because I removed that field. Okay, well, then I should change it, you know? And so you can sort of selectively decide which Beha test you want to run when you're doing your development. And you can still run all of them on here. You can still go like cd into this directory and run Bhat on all of those features if you want to. But at some point, some of them are going to start failing because you've made changes, and you know they're going to fail.
Yeah.
So at that point, you might want to copy them over and make the changes that
I
you
think
need to
the
make
short
on your
answer
own.
is magic of sub-profiles. In a way,
Yeah.
'cause you control your own fate around that sub-profile, and you don't necessarily need to be dependent on stuff in the upstream profile.
Yep. Carol?
When you go to write Beha tests, you can do all sorts of testing.
Mhm.
How did you limit yourself to such that you can say 100% and not forever?
That's why I said there's maybe a little asterisk right there.
Yeah, I
But
know.
yeah, you do have to balance that,
Well,
right?
how did you define it?
So we defined it mostly on the stuff that we built, you know. So like we didn't test the Drupal create a content type, right?
Right.
Because so we tested things like, can you create an article? Because we built the article feature. Are all those fields there? And when I fill out those fields, do they show up in the, do they show up in the display? We built some views. So after I created those articles, do they show up in the news view and with the right words? That sort of thing. So we test the functionality that we built. We also tested some default configuration, which also you start running into problems when you need to do Beha tests against existing sites versus a fresh install. And that's something we're still struggling with a little bit, because once you go in and you start changing things on an existing site, maybe all of those tests aren't going to pass anymore. And so we haven't quite figured that out yet.
I mean, we had the same problem when we were doing Bhat on our
Right.
install. You kind of have to run it on a fresh one, and then at least you know a fresh site looks right.
Right.
You cut your losses there as far as that goes.
Well, and there's ways of tagging Beha tests too, so we could tag it with update or something like that, and then we know that these ones are pretty safe, that we don't allow them to change. So one of the things we do in the profile, this is awesome by the way, we've really figured out how to handle configuration management, and so we have the features, which we reserve the right to revert features. And then we have default config, and they're stored in sort of different places. Features are in a module, and the config's in there. And then we have the default config, which is stored in the profile. There's also a module in SiteFarm Seed. Go and poke around on this. It's called Lock SiteFarm Features. And this allows us to take the content types and views and taxonomy vocabularies and anything else that we want just based on Drupal's routing system, and it locks it in the interface. So people are in SiteFactor, and we give them access to administer content types, but they can't touch the ones that we build. They can go create their own, but they can't touch the ones that we build. And so we know that we can revert the feature-based config because we know we've locked all that down. And that's pluggable. So in Seed, you could extend that and add your own routes that you want to block down. And there's even a little UI where if a site manager says, I don't want anybody to ever go and, I don't know, edit this one node, or whatever. So you could put that stuff in there too. Or this configuration page. I don't want them to ever go and do this configuration page. You can lock that down as well.
I think we're over time.
We're totally over time. So thank you very much, everybody. I have stickers. Go get SiteFarm stickers. And
Those
then
winners collect your shirts.
we got t-shirts. I have a small and a large. I do have a small one of these. This is probably expensive.
Anthony.
Nice your order.
What's up?
Nice job, yeah.
The logo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Didn't get to ask my
Red